part of me smiling.
But so what makes it the lifeblood? Like why is this so important, I guess, is the...
I think it's because, well, and so one thing that comes to mind right away is it distinguishes it from other relationships.
Authenticity, I don't necessarily think requires us to show up expressing our feelings, and I can still be vulnerable and not do that. So that's one of the...
I think you have to remember that when we're thinking about partnering up with somebody, we really want to feel special.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we make the other person feel special and chosen, and vice versa.
You got to have some self-awareness skill
That's
building.
what I think it is.
It's got to start first, right? And I think it's really paying attention to what's happening inside of you.
Yes.
And so that fear, like, am I afraid to? And then being willing to get into dialogue with yourself. Somebody really...
No.
I'm joking.
No.
Can I tell my examples?
You can, but make sure it's from the right movie.
Okay. Everybody to the therapist take. We're going to talk about vulnerability as being the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, Josh.
How are you?
Good.
Feeling vulnerable today?
Nope.
Is this vulnerable for you to do?
To talk about vulnerability?
Yeah.
No, I'll do it in a very unvulnerable way.
Is the
How's that?
podcast vulnerable
Yeah.
for you to
it
do?
is.
I think it...
Do you?
Yeah, it is for me, but I mean, I think it might be a little bit more for you. I really honestly don't like being in front of the cameras
I know. I don't either.
that much.
But
But
I don't at all.
I do like the discussions and broadcasting the discuss. That doesn't make me feel...
I like talking
as
with you.
vulnerable.
That doesn't make me feel as vulnerable.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really sweet.
Well, you know that already, right?
Well, you wonder,
Yeah.
But, it's nice to hear it
when
validated.
when I'm teasing
Yeah.
you or griping at you, you wonder.
Yeah. So we were kind of looking for... We've talked about some heavy things, I feel like, recently. We did the podcast episode on the holidays, and of course we're still in the middle of the holidays. And I was thinking, maybe we could do another holiday one, but I think, if people listening to this, if you go back and listen to the Thanksgiving special that we did, I think we covered some ground with it. So there's some really good information. It's a 2-part series. We had our friends, Shannon and Whitney, on with us, and I felt like it went really well. So it's a really good episode. We're talking about vulnerability as the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So it's supposed to be kind of a lighter topic, but
It's really...
We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But before we get started, just want to cover the basic housekeeping things. Just reminding everybody to please, if you're watching this on YouTube, to subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and smash that like button, is what they say on there. So I'm going to start saying, smash it. Okay. Smash the like button.
Okay. It makes me think of your baseball love.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That makes sense.
I was thinking Hulk.
Oh yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
So. Hit that like button, smash it. And then if you're listening to this on the audio platforms, please just stop what you're doing just for a quick second and go give us a 5-star review. And then if you have a couple spare minutes, you can write something kind about your listening experience on the content that we're putting out there. So this it's a very nice thing for us to read, and it makes us feel good. But at the same time, the main objective is really to please the different algorithms so that the content can get out to more people. Okay, so now let's real quickly, I'm going to give you guys the episode breakdown to kind of just tell you what we're going to be talking about today. So in talking about vulnerability as the lifeblood of a healthy relationship, we're going to start with defining what vulnerability means, what it means to us as clinicians, and move on from there into talking about this idea that there's no such thing as risk-free intimacy. So hope that's got your attention. Then there's this question of how much is too much, or is there such a thing of there being too much vulnerability? Is there a certain point where it's too risky, basically? And then moving from there into just some practical, actionable steps to kind of move you toward vulnerability in your relationships. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
How you feeling about it?
Easy.
Easy breezy.
Mm-hmm.
I am having a little bit of a squirrel moment. Can I just...
As usual, yes.
Is that your Coke Zero back there?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I wondered when you would say you want one.
Well,
and then I thought, why didn't I bring one for Josh?
It's almost as bad as having those nerd clusters out in the basket out there. Like, I just can't stop thinking about that Coke Zero right now.
I know. How good it tastes.
I know.
Sorry, I shouldn't have brought it
Sorry.
in.
You know what's the one thing that keeps me from grabbing it right now is the lipstick that's all over the
Good.
top
That's
of it. I'm like,
part of the reason that women put lipstick on is so that it marks your beverage.
I don't think my kids should be allowed to drink bubbly
Okay.
because it's like you need to drink. You haven't even drink out of a hose yet.
You can't be drinking
You
special
can't be
water.
drinking water out of a can. I'm like, you haven't earned your stripes.
That's funny. I drink out of a hose. I remember how it tastes. I can
You're
taste it immediately when
darn
you say
skippy.
that. Yeah.
That's probably why we never get sick.
True.
Our immune
Maybe
system's
so.
always-
We can thank the hose.
Yeah, thank the water hose. All the immunity we built up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we drink out of water hoses.
Probably.
Right. Okay. Well,
Okay,
listen.
squirrel.
Yeah,
Back to vulnerability.
Squirrel moment. Sorry, guys. I'll make sure to put a tag in the description in the chapters section. It says squirrel moment. So
Okay.
you can just skip over it if you
Right.
want. Okay. So let's start with talking about the first thing on defining vulnerability.
Defining.
And this definition comes from, it's a Microsoft Bing definition. It says vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed either physically or emotionally. I think it's a good baseline
Yeah, it's pretty good.
definition. I mean, but it definitely, when it gets into what we're talking about, is
Yeah.
a little bit different.
Yeah,
But,
I think it's a step.
yeah.
Well, we're going for of course, we're looking at it from the relational
Mm-hmm.
psychological perspective most
Yeah.
of the time.
But in terms of like a foundational
Yep.
definition, it's, the state or quality, or the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of
that.
being harmed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in essence really what it is.
I like that it says quality or state.
Yeah. And it also distinguishes physically or
Yep.
it's
Or
either
emotionally.
physically or emotionally. It doesn't, or really.
Yeah.
But then, old ChatGPT, what would we do
well.
without our buddy Chat?
I'll never know.
So what ChatGPT said was vulnerability is the willingness to show up authentically, express your feelings, and let others see the real you, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain.
It's pretty good.
I think it's better for sure.
Well, it's
Yeah.
better for us. I mean, I think vulnerable to like physical, like, you need to wear a seatbelt because you're vulnerable to bodily harm in a car accident. The first definition definitely speaks more to that. This one definitely knows its audience, Josh, when it gave you that definition. Chat
Yeah.
knows who they're talking to.
Yeah, that's right. Because
Right.
it's logging in all
Yes.
its. So somebody else might type it in on ChatGPT, give it a completely different.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
ChatGPT is going like, for you,
For you,
you
doctor,
just need
nurse.
to just be
Yeah.
still.
Yeah, right. You are vulnerable, be still.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that does I mean, it is a fitting definition. Of course, authenticity, which we
Yes.
did an episode on that because I think one year the word of the year for Webster's word of the year was gaslighting, and the next year it was authenticity,
Uh-huh, I
right? So we
remember that.
actually did
We did, yeah.
an episode on that and talked about it. So what authenticity looks like for any given person is going to be different, right? And that's really up to each individual to determine for themselves what's authentic. But authenticity, I don't necessarily think requires us to show up expressing our feelings, and I can still be vulnerable and not do that. So that's
right.
one of the, even though I do think expressing your feelings is part of vulnerability, I think you can be vulnerable without expressing your feelings.
Yes, I agree.
And also still be authentic at the same time.
Yes.
And I think you can also be vulnerable without letting others see the real you. So like I said, I think it's a good working definition. But I mean, it fits with what vulnerability is. But vulnerability is really nuanced to different people in different situations. Would you agree?
I agree, yes.
Right. So
Yes,
like if
contexts.
right. So we were talking about like the person that needs to be still versus the person that needs to move, right?
Yeah.
So it's to one, being still might be not being vulnerable, and to someone else it's vulnerable. But to somebody else, getting up and taking action might be vulnerable, and somebody else it's not.
Right.
Kind of like we were talking about, this is a little less vulnerable for me than it is for you.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's individualized, right?
Right.
But it's also context specific too, right? Sometimes it's expected to be authentic, and
Right.
sometimes everybody knows your best foot forward,
Right.
right?
So what would you say are the common denominators are, despite the definition, that you're probably going, this is what you're looking for to determine this is vulnerable?
I think genuineness is kind of,
Mm-hmm.
to reference the definition.
Right.
I think that's key. I think it requires courage,
Right.
whether it's measurable by an outside source or not. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's some way to say, oh gosh, I was vulnerable, even though it was
Mm-hmm.
potentially risky
Right.
or harmful or difficult.
Right. So that would also mean that fear would have to be involved, right?
Yes,
If you-
courage, right, is the recognition of fear, and as I say, what doing
Right.
it anyways.
Like if somewhere in the definition, if I were writing it, and we could work in something about not taking the path of least resistance.
Oh yeah.
I think that might be a common denominator. So whether that means expressing your feelings, sometimes it's not. Sometimes
Yeah,
being vulnerable is to keep your feelings to yourself,
Yes.
as we can see on like Facebook
Yeah.
a lot, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people just need to keep it to themselves,
Sure.
keeping thoughts or feelings, and sometimes you need to speak up.
Yes. Right.
That to me is what really captures vulnerability. How's that work out relationally, you think?
Hopefully, it's when we talk about with clients a lot, right? Like, you want your insides to match your outsides.
Yeah.
So when you're in a coupleship, when you're in a committed relationship, hopefully you can be authentic, and that what you're saying and doing matches. There's not a performance. There's not a holding back or a withholding, right?
Right.
And that's going to be a marker that relationship is intimate. I mean, the presence of vulnerability is the indicator of intimacy, right? I think when you are, especially when you're stressed or in survival mode, you can miss the cues, the indicators, the experience right before you of somebody demonstrating vulnerability.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So I think, and this is something I talk to clients about too, is vulnerability begets vulnerability.
I think that's true.
And so, like, if you're a couple listening to this, like, vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So you have to be vulnerable. But if you've had a period of time in your relationship where it's difficult, there's a lot of conflict, and you're having trouble being vulnerable, and so you start doing some of the work to be vulnerable, well, what that's going to do to your partner is make them automatically feel vulnerable, and they often, it's unsettling because, like I just said, vulnerability is meant to be unsettling. But when you made me feel vulnerable, and I wasn't prepared for it, and so then my body tries to work itself out of that vulnerability, and then fights kind of get started.
Start happening. Yeah, sure.
So I think a lot of us can relate to that time when I'm like, I'm just going to speak. I'm going to bring this up, and then all it's like, oh, that didn't go well.
Yes, sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so when your partner sees that vulnerability, sometimes for the first time, it's alarming, and they respond to that alarm.
They respond to that alarm, and you have to remember, denial is such an automatic response for us, right? That
Sure.
they're not being vulnerable, they're whatever, right? And so you the denial becomes a way to kind of jump you into defensive protection mode, right?
You're right.
So yeah, I get, and again, this is something that you'll see when there either hasn't been the presence of vulnerability or it hasn't been there in a long time, right?
Right.
And so sometimes I'll even help people shift from denial to skepticism, right? Oh, you were kind of maybe skeptical about, was that your partner being vulnerable, right? Which actually that starts inviting vulnerability.
Right. Yeah, a good example that I thought was really cool that I saw done in a presentation once, where someone was trying to illustrate how vulnerability begets vulnerability, is like they brought two people up on stage. They're in front of a big audience, right? And they brought two people up on stage, and then he just had the presenter had these two people, I think were of the same sex, and he's kind of inching them in closer and closer into each other's space, right? And they start to get uncomfortable, and it's not because of their sexuality, just because you're in each other's space.
Yeah, the bubble.
Right? A stranger that I don't know, and he keeps inching us closer and closer. Well, eventually, one of the participants, I think, kind of like blows a kiss at the other one, right? And And then the entire audience breaks out in laughter, right? So the presenter said, all right, so what you just experienced was, me putting them in a position where they are feeling vulnerable as I inched them closer together. And because of that vulnerability, that it got so uncomfortable that one of them felt compelled to blow a kiss at the other one, right? To kind of break that vulnerability, to kind of break out of it, right?
Right.
But then he points out, he goes, and then all of you laughed. He's like, it wasn't funny. That's not funny. It's like, so why did you laugh? Because all of you were feeling vulnerable too, watching it happen. And I thought that was just such a really good
That is such a
example
good example.
of how vulnerability happens and how we naturally want to respond to it because it starts to feel dangerous sometimes. And so if you can imagine that happening in a couple relationship where somebody's got to sit down and give an apology, or someone needs to speak up about something that they've been just kind of been on their mind and they haven't been talking about it, and it's time to talk about it, and then they do it, and then the other person experiences that vulnerability themselves, and you just kind of got to kind of broaden your expectations on what may or may not happen when this person just unannounced experiences this vulnerability.
It can be.
Yeah.
You can see why people would get tense,
Yeah.
right? Oh, I didn't know this is what game we were
We're not
playing.
removed from it either. I mean, it happens to me.
And what happened? Well, yeah, it happens to us, but it happens to us as therapists too, right?
It absolutely happens to
Sure.
us as therapists.
Yeah.
Do you agree that vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship? Sounds like a
Probably.
vampire.
And it does. I
Yeah.
do think that when you say it. So yeah, part of me is smiling. a
But so
little
what
bit.
makes it the lifeblood? Like why is this so important, I guess, is the...
I think it's because, and so one thing that comes to mind right away is it distinguishes it from other relationships, right? And I think you have to
Yeah.
remember that when we're thinking about partnering up with somebody, we really want to feel special.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we make the other person feel special and chosen, and vice versa, right? So if you know that that the truth about me, the authentic me, then we're special, right? It's
Yeah.
a gift. It's precious,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, and so there are varying degrees, basically. Like
I think there are, yeah.
because there's vulnerability in a handshake, right?
And this
Yeah,
is something
so-
as therapists, especially for
Right.
people that struggle with things like love addiction. Don't you find yourself, thinking about? I think about Patrick Carnes, kind of as we've heard him, the godfather of sex addiction treatment. He has those stages of courtship, where really stages of courtship are about helping people build intimacy and vulnerability, like appropriate levels of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
We can get to that in recommendations, but that's there to say, hey, yeah, you don't have to tell, the checkout person at the grocery store about your extremely personal health information.
Yeah.
Right?
About your colonoscopy.
About your colonoscopy, right? But you can
Yeah.
tell that's things you tell people that you have
Right.
some kind of closer relationship,
Right. Yeah, so that can, get into boundary stuff. We're going to talk
Right.
about that.
But that's a level of intimacy. Like,
Sure.
I think if I
Yeah.
tell you something very personal, that reflects
Yeah.
my trust in you, reflects that I can be vulnerable. I choose to be
Right.
vulnerable with you.
Right, and I would say like the committed couple relationship is at the peak of that extreme. So, like if you look at vulnerability as on a continuum, what relationships get the highest level of vulnerability, those do. And so that's why. So like if you're wondering, which happens a lot, people say like, how come I go to work and like I just feel like respected. I feel like I'm a good communicator and then I go home and there's just we can't get nothing gets across the way it's supposed to, and I'm just as guilty as she is, or whatever. Whether it's vulnerability and the level of vulnerability you're experiencing, like the level of emotional investment into this relationship we call committed relationship is far beyond what it would be for a work relationship or most other relationships for that matter. So that's why, so a lot of people are smart, educated, they know how to communicate, and they do it in their jobs. They've
They do it
advanced
with
in life very well.
acquaintances, yeah.
And then all of a sudden we have trouble doing it here. And it's because of this emotional element.
Sure, the emotional element, which makes it there for the lifeblood.
Right.
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 Because that's
Exactly.
what makes it significant and
Right.
nutritious.
So one thing that I often have said, and we've talked about before with clients, particularly when we work with betrayal trauma clients, because clients that are caught up in habitual sexual behaviors and in infidelity and things like that, they're often trying to accomplish this phenomenon that we call risk-free intimacy. So the fear of attaching, the fear of getting close to somebody else, they can kind of enter into a fantasy world. And what I say, there's only one world where risk-free intimacy exists, and it's in the fantasy world, which isn't real.
Right.
So if it's not
real,
so which means there's no risk-free intimacy isn't real. There's no such thing.
Bummer.
So, right.
And you can see people and think of people and situations that people have tried their very best. They've been very diligent at trying to find the exception to this. Right.
I remember my son asking me telling me a riddle once, or asking me a riddle, saying, "How do you jump off of a 20-foot ladder onto solid concrete and not get hurt?"
How?
You jump off the bottom rung. If I'm somebody that only feels safe on that bottom step, if I don't want to face the reality of having a less than intimate experience relationally, I start creating ideas of what intimacy is, and that's when people often find themselves going into other relationships or getting lost into
world.
or pornography or whatever, and kind of thinking that that's intimacy. If there's no risk involved in it, then it's not intimacy. If you're not feeling a sensation of fear and discomfort, right, it's not intimacy, and it's not vulnerability.
Right.
So I don't know why it has to be that way. It's just the way it is.
Well, that's another episode.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about the question of, can someone be too vulnerable, and if so, like, how much is too much?
Yes, there can be too much vulnerability.
Sure.
But it's of course, it's like, but let's talk about it like it means, right?
Yeah.
I think too much vulnerability maybe looks like one-sided vulnerability in a relationship, right? So someone is willing to put themselves out there emotionally. They're demonstrating, they're telling the truth, they're genuine, and they're not getting it back. And I don't mean that it's wrong to do that. I just mean you're probably not going to get what you want. So it kind of runs a little bit similar, but also counter to what you said, that vulnerability begets vulnerability. Right. And I do think that if we're using vulnerability as a tool to invite others to be vulnerable with us in return, I think that's great. But we can't guarantee that will actually happen. Right. Somebody may be unwilling to put their stuff. They just may not reflect back.
Sometimes you can experience somebody else being too vulnerable.
Yes.
With you, like this is too soon. So I think of like a dating relationship, for example.
Right, I was thinking that.
And someone starts talking about something, you're like, well, that was awfully quick to dive into that topic.
Right.
Or, oh, you want me to meet your parents? Like, it's the second date,
right. Right.
Or they're talking a lot about their relationship they just got out of, or something. So there's obviously something going on for this person, but those are red flags. Right, like, and those red flags are so often ignored.
Yes, I would agree. Blown past. Yeah.
Right. So on one side of it is like paying attention to when somebody else is being too vulnerable. So the level of vulnerability that they're sending your direction is just contextually inappropriate or abnormal. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what you're talking about is that when the level of vulnerability is actually appropriate, but it's not being reciprocated.
Sure, yeah,
back.
That's very distinguished, yeah.
Right, and now then, of course, at some point in time, that person will have to be able to determine that my level of vulnerability is now inappropriate because I'm not getting that reciprocation.
Yes.
And we often will see people that won't do that. They'll just keep giving and keep giving and keep giving.
Yeah.
In that way, and just hope that someday this person gives back.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that being vulnerable is courageous, but like anything, it's a precious resource.
Right.
Right.
So this is tricky because this is where, at some point, if you are being vulnerable and you're realizing that your vulnerability, you're giving more than you're fairly receiving in return, and you don't back off that vulnerability to appropriate levels, or have different types of vulnerable discussions with your partner, like come to Jesus meetings type thing, but yet you just keep doing it, I would say you are no longer being vulnerable.
And what would you say is happening instead?
Because I think being vulnerable would to be not be vulnerable in that point.
Okay.
Like the hard thing to do is to back off. Like I'm not willing to give like this anymore, and that's
I
vulnerability
agree.
because
It is
I'm
vulnerable.
the risk is losing you.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So the reason I gave so much in the beginning was risk of losing you. Now I'm afraid to not give because I don't want to lose you.
Yeah.
So that's why vulnerability gets real tricky.
Yeah, and I think too that, again, like I'm even thinking as you're talking the parent-child relationship where, parents give and are willing to accept more vulnerability than the child gives to the parent. But why that works is you're cool with it. Like the parent understands it.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there is more of what would be a more mutual relationship, a romantic or
Yeah, we're talking about basically
partners.
peer-to-peer
Right.
type relationships. Like,
Same level to same level.
yeah, you're talking about like hierarchical relationships, and those are really different. Vulnerability
Very
looks
vulnerable.
really different. The distribution.
Yes.
In fact, there's virtually, as parents, we just don't expect we don't get anything kind of lifebloody from our kids being vulnerable back to us. Like I'm okay whether my kids are vulnerable to me or not,
Right,
but my
right.
kids won't be okay if
If
I'm
I'm
not
not.
vulnerable with them.
Right, right.
Right.
Just different.
Exactly.
Totally different.
Because the objectives are different and the relationship is completely different. But yes, on a peer-to-peer, these are parent. Would you agree that a parent-child relationship isn't a give and take?
No, it's not.
Right.
Everyone who's a parent knows.
Right.
Or should know.
It's just a give.
It's only giving.
Oh yeah, no. I think parents were like, I take a lot of shit.
Yeah, that's why the lipstick on the drink. See,
Right. This is a give and take.
it's a give and take.
But
And other hierarchical, like an employer to an employee. The employee comes in, is having a hard time, tells the boss is not going to respond. Well, let me tell you about my hard time, right? So
that's a great example.
We're
Yeah.
talking about hierarchical relationships in
Yeah.
this situation, but
Right.
yes, peer to peer on the same level.
Exactly. So using the work example, two employees come into each other and say, I had a really hard day. And another one says, oh yeah, let me tell you about mine too, and like they can do that.
Right, right.
It's different from in the
Employer
other
to
one, right?
employee, yeah.
So, so we're talking about give and take relationships, which is kind of, it's not romantic. It's not, I mean, we like to think of, the you complete me, Jerry Maguire.
You make me feel everything I need.
Right, and unconditional love. And
Yeah.
as much as I do think there is a level of unconditional love involved in couple relationships, it only goes as far as the emotion itself. So in other words, the love, no matter what you've done, the love, unconditional love I have for you makes it hard for me to just leave you. Like if you had an affair or something, the unconditional love is what got me into the therapy office with you, because how many couples we've heard say that? Like it just would have been
Millions, it
easier
feels
if I
like,
just
yeah.
could stop loving this person.
Yeah.
Right.
If I didn't let feelings be easy.
Right.
I know what to
So
do.
the give and take piece comes in the action part of love, right? Which if you have one part of love that's unconditional, another part that is conditional, to me it's all conditional. Then,
Yeah,
right?
I think it's
it's
salt
like-
water and fresh
Exactly.
water. Yeah.
Right. And so, so in these give and take type relationships, there is a reasonable expectation of vulnerability from your partner. And if you're not receiving that, and you're unwilling to acknowledge that to your partner, then that means that you are now not being vulnerable.
Yes, right. Right.
in the relationship because you're afraid to do something that needs to be done, basically. Which goes back to the path of least resistance.
Yeah, and
type
again,
thing.
though, to back to kind of where you started, what makes this interesting is sometimes that is appropriate.
Yeah.
That would be the most vulnerable thing to do, to stop being
Sure.
vulnerable. Yeah.
We should probably do a little disclaimer though about like dangerous people.
Yes.
Would you agree
Yes.
with that? Like, so there's a, like, I wouldn't want somebody in a domestic violence situation to listen to this podcast and go, you know what, I'm going to speak up.
I need to speak
and then
up
you
and
get
be
hurt.
vulnerable. Right.
The vulnerable thing really to do in those situations is to reach out to for help.
Help, support. Yeah.
But also don't want people listening to this to think because I had a hard time with that makes you weak somehow. There are people in certain situations where there is a psychological phenomenon that's happening that makes taking action steps for your well-being very, very difficult to do. And they see it on the other side of it, and especially victims of domestic violence, and they finally get out.
Yes.
And they look back and they feel all this intense shame and guilt for why they didn't do it sooner. It's like you got to show some grace toward yourself because there is, I think it's a scientific phenomenon. I don't know enough about it to be able to adequately explain it here, but that's happening in the brain that this is not the same as, I need to talk to my partner about, something that they did that hurt my feelings the other day. It's a completely different thing. So just want to put that disclaimer out
Okay, I
there.
appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, so we established, you can experience too much vulnerability. You can also experience too much from somebody else, and that being a red flag relationally.
Yes.
But also a red flag for yourself of that the vulnerable thing for me to do might be to not do something.
Yeah. Right.
To be still, some of kind of the things that we don't typically think about. All right, so last thing to talk about is just action steps. Like if someone listening to this, like what would
I stink at this. I'm not good at being vulnerable or something like that. I have clients say that. Don't
I
you?
thought you were saying. I was like,
no.
Carrie, I wanted to say, like, Carrie, you're fine.
Comfort
You're
me
doing
immediately.
great.
I'm not worried about it. No, but like
Rebecca over there, though.
I know. Maybe so.
She's filling in for Hannah
I know.
today.
She's
working our slides.
I know. Good job.
These are actually, by the way, these are hard questions for therapists to answer.
Oh, we're so annoying at this because we don't
this
just
is when we
spit
get
it out.
right, because I wish I could. Sometimes I wish I was like that. I even have talked to my wife about this. About like sometimes I just wish I could just be a black and white thinker and just be like, you know what you need to do.
Remember the other day we were like, don't you feel sorry for our kids sometimes when they ask us things and we're like, well,
so bad for him. I did it again to my son. Man, this kid, I had a parent fail, and I did a repair. Which, by the way, I want to do an episode on repair attempts. Okay. But I did a repair with him, and he sent me a text later. Really sweet kid. Sent me a text later, just saying, thank you, I love you, and a couple other things, and I was like, son, one of the hardest things about being a parent. Sorry, I'm embarrassed by it. One of the hardest things about being a parent is not knowing how you hurt your kids.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and you won't know either. Fully until you're probably much older. And then I was like, but when that day comes, you can always come talk to me. Oh man,
so sweet. And you're also like, just shut up, right?
And then I was like, and I said, and so there was some kind of like statement like, you remember that, da 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 da. And I went this like that, and like this 2 paragraphs, right? And then he texted me back,
okay,
I will. Was it?
Have you seen those jokes going around about like how if you read your text between parent and teen that it looks like an abusive relationship? Because it's the same thing. It's all of this nice language
yes.
that's K.
Yeah.
And it's just, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. That's what it makes me think.
But
yeah.
yes, we do. Our kids. Oh.
I know.
But what I will say to the action steps, just so we can give you something, is that you got to have some self-awareness skill
That's
building.
what I think it is.
It's
yeah.
got to start
Yeah.
first, right? And I think it's really paying attention to what's happening inside of you.
Yes.
And so that fear, like, am I afraid to? And then being willing to get into dialogue with yourself. Something I really like to work with clients on is like a literal dialogue with yourself.
Yes, I love it.
Of going down the rabbit hole of asking yourself all the questions your kids would ask you when they're like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Why? Like, but to do that, you're like, why do I feel this? Why does my brain think I need to feel this right now? Why am I a grown person and I'm terrified of asking what seemingly is a simple question,
Or
nothing
speaking
scary.
up about something.
Right.
Right.
Why I have such a hard time with this, and
Yeah.
and then
The
when
self-awareness skills.
right, and that's kind of a place to begin, because you're really looking at like your own red flags, like
That's a good way to say it.
but then being willing to also ask yourself the question of like, what is my partner doing that makes this more difficult for me? And I think that's an important piece, because I'm not blaming my partner. I'm recognizing that they're not making me
No
like
one can
this.
make you. Right.
Right. But they definitely can make it more difficult.
Right.
So if I am feeling some fear toward them, maybe I shouldn't be feeling a debilitative fear, but none at all might not be the answer
Might be
to that
reasonable,
either, right? So like,
both and. It's a me thing and what's happening in the relationship.
right.
Well, I think the self-awareness piece, and I would just add that, again, like I do often, like what's happening in your body, right? When you notice that you have this certain response to being vulnerable or not being vulnerable, right? Where is that in your body? What does that location mean to you? How do you know? How do you start recognizing it faster? Because when you've been someone who numbs or stays cognitive and doesn't take in body information, you may down the road go, ooh, I really missed the boat. Right when my stomach twisted, that was my noticing that was my body screaming,
Right.
hey, this is an opportunity, right, or whatever. So I think building on that self-awareness, I work with lots of women that will say to me very often, I don't know what I like. I don't know. How do I be vulnerable if I don't know who I am? I don't know what my thoughts or my feelings or my opinions are. So that's a real beautiful place for some self-awareness, right? Like some clients will bring up to me, do you remember that Julia Roberts movie, Runaway Bride?
No.
Okay.
Of course I do.
The scene that stands out, and I have women bring this up on their own. I don't use this as an illustration. They'll bring it up. But the scene where someone reflects that she eats her eggs however the partner eats their eggs. And so the question is, how do you actually like your eggs? And that's a great illustration of some of this self-awareness, especially for people who say, I don't know how to be vulnerable because I don't really know what I like, right? I've become so adaptive, right? That idea that you're so go along to get along, that where do I stand? And so that's an important piece. That's a beautiful piece.
Right.
As far as the individual piece of developing the ability to be vulnerable.
You want to hear my Runaway Bride example?
Yes. Does
Because
it fit?
it fits.
Okay.
It fits, and I've used this in therapy. Yes, I have used a Runaway Bride example. At the end of the movie, where she, what's the guy's name? Dermot, the guy that plays
Dylan McDermott? Is it Dylan?
No, it's not Dylan McDermott.
okay.
It's I can't remember his name. But anyways, the main guy, he's Cameron Diaz, who's his love interest.
No. You're mixing up the movies.
Wait, is mixing up movies?
You're doing My Best Friend's Wedding.
Sorry.
Yeah. Richard Gere is the main guy in Runaway Bride.
My bad.
You're right. McDermott is the guy in My Best Friend's Wedding.
Well, can I tell
They're
that one?
very important movies for people that were in
Can
the
I
90s.
tell? Sorry.
Okay.
I
Just
want to be a huge
distinguishing.
Julia Roberts fan.
I know, she's great.
There was a wedding in both of them.
They're both about weddings,
And
you're
they both
right.
have Julia Roberts.
Yes.
They both have Cameron Diaz.
No.
I'm joking.
No.
Can I tell my examples?
You can, but make sure it's from the right movie.
Okay. My best friend's wedding.
Good, got it, yeah.
Yes, I use my best friend's wedding example. right
Good.
there.
Okay.
I'll have to adopt your Runaway Bride one though.
Okay.
So he's chasing Cameron Diaz, and because she has found out whatever, and then Julia Roberts, who's also in love with the dude, is chasing him, right?
Yes.
And then she gets on the phone with her best friend.
I remember.
And she's like telling him like, it's all out now, it's all out in the open, da da da, and he's running after her, and I'm running after him, and he's like, slow down a second or whatever. I haven't seen this in years, so I'm probably butchering it, but he's like, so you're saying like, she's running from him. She's like, yeah, and he's chasing her, and you're chasing him, and he says, who's chasing you? And that's that moment of clarity for her, of the vulnerable thing for her to do in that moment
Is to not.
is to stop running, stop chasing him. And so, but you got to have some level of self-awareness. And I think, I think it was episode 10, actually, when Whitney came on and talked about those 3 channels of self-awareness. Would be a good episode to go revisit.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And I also, though, to kind of take it back to you, this isn't just an individual thing. Like you said, this is also a couple perspective of, when do I think it is more challenging for me to be this way in this relationship? Yeah. Could be that you don't feel like someone's listening. Right. They're not giving you cues of this being important, etc.
Just like in the my best friend's wedding example that I gave, couples often they want their partner to respond favorably to them in different ways and the things they're achieving, and so they pursue that. But one of the things that I think is really important to do is, like, if you're like wanting your partner, for example, to be accepting of you, to show compassion towards you, to hear you, you will have a better chance of getting them, I guess, to do that, or inspiring them to do that, if you do it for yourself.
Absolutely.
First, you will be a much more compassionate person to others and inspire compassion in response if you are compassionate towards self.
I agree.
So, sometimes the vulnerable thing to do is let it be okay that you're feeling certain ways, so that if you do experience some level of rejection or pushback on it, you won't crawl under a rock or fight back when it happens.
Right.
You will say, no, this is okay. It is okay for me to feel this way.
Yeah.
It is okay for me to get upset right now. It is okay for me to be afraid. It's okay for me to be hurt, even if the way I'm remembering something didn't happen exactly the way I'm remembering it. This is how I remember it.
Right. This is still how
this is how I experienced it, right? And I think that's a crucial piece.
I do too. And I'll say the last thing about that is we often will use the terms of set and setting, right? So if you're trying to, recognize and build, vulnerability, sometimes you have to, make the set and setting comparable to that, right? Trying to be vulnerable while you're chopping vegetables and feeding the dog, of like, I really wanted to tell you something very important that's hard for me. You do have to be mindful of that, right? When we're talking about especially the couple piece, right? And that's something actionable, right? That we can be like, okay, what is the best, how do I do this, and what's the best setting for that?
Right. Well, I think we solved the world's problems today.
Yeah, I think we did. We didn't know how we could wrap it up, but we did.
I was a little worried, feeling a little vulnerable that we weren't going to be able to, that we were going to just be subpar therapists and podcast hosts.
That'd be terrible.
Just want to remind everybody again, if you haven't yet, after hearing this amazing episode, give us that 5-star review, to subscribe to our channel, smash that like button, and show up again on our next one. I don't know if we will have another podcast episode this year, but we definitely will be picking back up in January. Yep. So thanks for being here.